2024 has been quite the year for Star Trek Online. You know, in some ways pretty good, in some ways not so good. So I wanted to take the opportunity to just kind of go over some of the stuff we got, mainly the ships. So we're going to be going over a lot of the ship releases that we got this year, because there have been some pretty great ships that have been released this year. So I wanted to take the opportunity to kind of go over everything and kind of highlight some of the good and bad and just kind of go through that. Just, you know, kind of a this year in review sort of thing, because, you know, it's the 30th. What else am I going to do? Starting off 2024 for the anniversary event was the Alliance Rex Pilot Escort, which was this year's anniversary event ship. This was pretty well received ship. Like there was a lot of really positive response out of this. Like, it's not anything particularly insanely powerful or anything. That it was just a fun ship. You know, it's a pilot ship. This was before they started putting like full commander level spec seats on event ships, so this only has a lieutenant commander pilot seat. Not that a commander level pilot seat would make a huge difference in this thing's performance, but it was fun. You know, it was got the pilot mechanics, it's got a cloak. Battle cloak would have been nicer, but it's got a cloak. But the big thing is it had the Vanguard wingman mechanic, and this is something I had been saying for years, that I'd been wanting to see the wingman mechanic on ships that weren't just Jem'Hadar Vanguard ships. And while this is still kind of Jem'Hadar Vanguard adjacent, because this was meant to be like an Alliance version of a Jem'Hadar ship and a Federation ship, so it's kind of like the Defiant and a Jem'Hadar attack ship had a little Alliance baby. But yeah, so it's still something I would really like to see, because the wingman mechanic is like my favorite ship mechanic in the game, and I would really love to see it utilized more, especially because I would be absolutely astonished if we ever see any more Jem'Hadar ships introduced into the game, because like Star Trek canon clearly isn't going in that direction. So it'd be a shame to just let this mechanic just sit there unused, just for the technicality that it's only ever been used on Vanguard ships before. I'd love to see this expanded into more use. I'm going to try to go through these kind of quick, because I've got like 25 ships to talk about. So next up, the Ahwahnee Command Carrier. This is one of the 4 ships released in the 14th anniversary bundle, which was released, when was that? On February 15th of this year. So the Ahwahnee, stats-wise, a lot of people weren't that impressed with it. I know it's a 3/3 carrier with Command Miracle Worker, so it wasn't anything super special, but I had fun in this thing. I managed to put together that Battlestar Galactica build on it, which I had a ton of fun in. So I really enjoyed this ship, but I know it wasn't for everyone. But the thing that was really great about the ship was its console and starship trait, flagship staffing, and fleet power network array. This console has been a huge game changer for the energy weapon meta. This thing is just like used everywhere, and flagship staffing can be really good on a pet build. So this was a really nice ship, purely just for the stuff it came with, but still a fun ship overall, in my opinion. Now, for the star of the 14th anniversary bundle, the Atlantis Temporal Destroyer. This thing is just a beast when it comes to energy weapon builds. Having a temporal intel combo, this thing is absolutely fantastic, and it's only gotten better since the release of the Vovin, because this thing, because of that, the meta is really revolving around the ability to get your console cooldowns as low as possible. And with how many unconventional systems triggers you're going to be able to get on this thing paired with the Vovin console, this thing you're going to be able to trigger off those clicky consoles just absolutely ridiculously fast. Plus, this thing has an experimental weapon slot, which also have gotten more and more valuable with the release of another ship. We'll get more into that later. But yeah, this is absolutely fantastic ship. I love this thing. The Atlantis is absolutely fantastic. Its starship trait was pretty okay, and I actually don't remember what its console does. What does it do? It gives radiation damage. Okay, so that wasn't that great for this sort of ship. Well, it was pretty decent for like a do-size setup, and it also does give you some energy or directed energy weapon damage too. So not a bad console, but overall, it's mainly like the big win here is the ship stats themselves. And also, I think it's pretty too. I always thought this was a really good looking ship. So yeah, I like this one. Also from the 14th anniversary bundle, the Chekov Intel Science Warship. This was the second science warship to be introduced into the game. The previous one being the Trailblazer from the previous anniversary bundle. This one was had much better stats on it, being a Intel Temporal combo, so really nice for EPG builds. This is probably one of the most powerful science vessels in the C-Store right now, if not like the whole game, honestly. I don't think it's the most powerful, but it's definitely up there. Though with science ships, especially science builds are kind of weird. I don't think they're everyone's cup of tea, but this one, this one was something. I do wish it came with better stuff though. Like the trait was okay for EPG builds, but the fact that it capped at a certain point, it wasn't super amazing. And then there was the console that turned out to be kind of a disappointment because it's that fusion cutter beam that kind of damages anything that comes in contact with it, but it moves really slowly, so it's just kind of like everything just kind of flies around it. It's not very responsive. It doesn't go where you want it to. So the console on this thing ended up being kind of but whatever. Also, because it's a science warship, it came with a lance ability. This one, the tunneling graviton lance, which again wasn't really anything super special, but it was interesting. It was just something that we'd never seen before on a ship, so it was just neat. And overall, this was a fun ship to experiment around with. And yeah, if you like science builds, I feel like this was something that you were probably into. The Princeton, definitely everyone's fourth favorite ship introduced in the 14th anniversary bundle. Yeah, this is not super well received, it being a 4-4 cruiser with too much engineering seating, but at the same time, I had fun in this thing. I know it's kind of goofy looking too, which I know not everyone's into, but I do enjoy the 3 nacelle look on this thing just because it's silly. But yeah, it's not the best ship, but it makes a solid tank. And honestly, I've gotten a decent amount of use out of the console on this thing. Fractal Integrity Bleed. I actually just recently started using this again on another ship that was released very recently, the Obena. Both the console from that ship and this ship pair surprisingly well together. So I've been having quite a bit of fun with that. So if you like that mixed DPS tank blend, which also comes with the side of kind of irradiating yourself in the face a little bit, which is a weird mechanic, but it's fun. I've been kind of enjoying it. So yeah, I know not everyone was super thrilled about the Princeton, but I enjoyed it. On to the first lockbox ship released from this year, which came out on January 23rd. This was the Duderstadt Miracle Worker Science Spearhead, and this one was not looked on that well, in my opinion. People were excited for Space Barbie reasons for it, because it has a very unique look to it. Personally, I'm not into it. I don't really like the low-hanging secondary hull that just kind of droops down like this. I'm not into it. I do like it from like this angle. You look at it, that looks kind of cool. But then you get to look at the underside, and it's just like, what is that? I'm not into it. But at the same time, the stats on this thing also weren't that great. Being a miracle worker with a secondary pilot seat on a lieutenant commander engineering seat, it's just horrible seating for a science vessel. The only thing this thing really has going for it is that extra console slot from it being miracle worker, and the fact that it's a spearhead, so you get an extra weapon slot. So really, with this setup, honestly, it makes me wonder, why wasn't this just a cruiser? It would have performed way better, because everything on this thing was so energy weapon focused, including the trait, which helped out energy weapon damage, as well as I think the console did too, didn't it? Yeah, it even buffs your weapon subsystem power. So yeah, there was no point in this being a science vessel, because it didn't come with a lot of science vessel stuff. I guess the point was to make it like a Dusai build, but without an intel seat. I would not want to put a Dusai build on this thing. So yeah, this one, I was not upset about this thing being a lockbox ship, because it just meant I didn't have to buy an expensive lockbox ship, because I didn't like it. The Orion D'Var Temporal Science Vessel. I was surprised this one didn't get more attention, honestly, because as a science vessel, it's got a solid setup on it. Like, yeah, it's got a lieutenant commander engineering seat, but it's on a intel seat, also being a full temporal ship. So the temporal intel combo is really nice. It's not overburdened with too much non-science seating, so you can really get a good amount of anomalies on this thing. This was a fantastic EPG build, and everyone just kind of slept on this one, in my opinion. It is a little high in the, well, not that high in the engineering console slots, because you still get 5 of the science slots. So yeah, I don't really know why no one was super into this. It even had a cool animation. All the little ball bits on this thing, which I guess are like part of the ship's warp system, I guess. They spin, and they get faster as the ship goes faster. I thought it looked kind of cool. But yeah, I'm surprised people weren't as into this as they were. Of course, I say that having never gotten the ship either myself, just because I would want this on an Orion character, and I don't have a science build set up on an Orion character. I guess that's the big thing. It's just, it doesn't work for Space Barbie. If this thing had been like a cruiser or an escort, I would have been way more into it. But it literally says in the episode, this is from a that episode of Strange New Worlds, which was the Lower Decks crossover, those old scientists. It literally says classic Orion Scout, which actually that's another thing. They made this thing a science vessel, but they didn't make it a scout vessel, which I guess that was kind of weird. They literally didn't give it the actual classification it is literally said to have in the episode, but at the same time, the thing is also rather large, and scout vessels tend to be kind of small. But yeah, it's odd. But I was into the ship, but at the same time, not into it enough to buy it, and I guess that was the whole problem with it to begin with. Now on to the first promo ship of the year, released on April 11th, the Kelvin Timeline Constitution II Intel Cruiser. This is the Enterprise A from the end of Star Trek Beyond, which a lot of people seem to think was already in the game. No, the Constitution refit from Star Trek Beyond and the Constitution II from Star Trek Beyond, two different ships. They look very similar, but there are noticeable differences. The refit from earlier in Star Trek Beyond, that is the one that is the legendary Kelvin Constitution that comes in the 10th anniversary bundle. This is a totally different ship, and honestly, the one from the legendary bundle, from the 10th anniversary bundle, way better stats, because this thing, the only thing it's really got going for it is that it's an intel ship and it has a 5.3 weapons layout. They still made this thing a normal cruiser, which I thought was a weird move. They gave it a pilot seat on the tactical seat, which again, not a great move. I would have put that on that universal seat just to give this thing a bit more flexibility. And yeah, the one upside is, again, it's got 5.3 layout. It's a full intel ship. It does have a cloak because it is an intel ship, but yeah, it's weird just because this thing is meant to be like the successor to the previous Constitution from Star Trek Beyond, but this feels like a downgrade compared to the legendary version. So I wasn't super into this one. Trait and console weren't anything special either, so let's just move on to the next one. Released on May 2nd into the C Store, we got the Science Destroyer, the Dyson Science Destroyer bundle, which was, we finally got T6 versions of the old Dyson Science Destroyer ships, which I am still bitter that they released Science Destroyers, ships that I am very vocal about not liking on my birthday. How dare they? They had a perfect opportunity to finally release Stu's Oops All Oddies bundle, but no, we got this garbage. I'm kidding a little. But honestly, as science ships go, these were actually pretty decent. This one is, there's no picture up here. The picture's down here for some reason. But this was the Kardashev, which was kind of like the Federation version of the Dyson Destroyer. This one was Command Temporal, which is pretty decent setup. The Klingon version, the Lolal, I think that's an L. It's either an L or an I. Can't really tell. But yeah, the Intel version, which was the Klingon version. So this one had Intel Command, which is pretty decent too. And then what I think was the best of the three, the Rallus Temporal Dyson Science Destroyer. This was the Romulan version, which had a Temporal Intel combo. Really nice ship. All three, they all have that lieutenant level engineering seat, which is a little high. I would have liked to see that just be ensign, but what can you do? Overall, these were, I mean, I've never been a fan of Science Destroyers just because I think the Science Destroyer mechanic is really stupid without the ability to change your loadout as well. You're basically just taking your ship and then reconfigure it to something that probably doesn't suit your build as well as you should be, because you're basically just having to split your build in half to suit both modes, and therefore you're making both modes less powerful in order to accommodate them. So you just have to, feed into one or the other, and if you're doing that, then what's the point of the mode change to begin with? At that point, you may as well just fly a science ship or fly an escort. There's really no point in being able to switch between both without the ability to change your entire loadout along with it. So yeah, that's always been my big gripe about Science Destroyers. But just as pure science vessels, all three of these ships, the Rallus especially, pretty fantastic, honestly. Assuming you like science builds, because again, I know that's still kind of a niche thing that not everyone is into, because most people just like the pew-pew weapon stuff, which case, these are okay with that. If you're running them in tactical mode, you could run them like that, but honestly, you'd be better off with something like the Atlantis. Oh, this one, the Aetherian Revelation, released into the Infinity lockboxes on May 28th, and man, this was certainly a ship that was released. No one cared about this thing. Some people were kind of amused with the look of this, with this ship, but man, no one really gave a shit. It has fairly underwhelming stats. I mean, it's kind of nice that it is a full intel ship, which is pretty decent for science vessels. But at the same time, the secondary America worker is terrible for this thing. So it felt so underwhelming, especially after just releasing the Dyson ships. Like the Rallus is far superior to this thing for a number of reasons too. Mainly that engineering seat. This thing has a lieutenant commander engineering seat. It's not even a spec seat. So lieutenant commander engineering, that's way too much engineering seating for any science build. So this thing was just, ugh. A lot of people slept on this one, and rightfully so. And honestly, it's really funny that this thing had such underwhelming stats too, because like the Aetherians are supposed to be like this crazy powerful extra dimensional beings that are introduced in Stowe, who we still don't know that much about. So to be fair, I guess I can't make too many assumptions about them. But yeah, it's presented as being these really powerful beings, but so far the only playable ship we've gotten from them has been super mid. Another one from the lockboxes. This one was released on July 2nd, the Credence Miracle Worker Dreadnought Cruiser. And honestly, I feel like this one was probably the best received lockbox ship of this year. This had a solid setup on it. It's a little engineering heavy, but it is a dreadnought, and it is kind of mitigated that it's only got the ensign level engineering seat as the second one, and the Miracle Worker on the primary commander seat. So it wasn't that bad. And at the same time, I know not everyone's into the look of the 32nd century ships. Not everyone's into the floating bits. I thought this ship looked pretty cool though. I always liked this one. This is why I was able to get this one. A viewer was kind enough to donate this to me, which I was very appreciative about, because I was able to do some stuff with this. This was a fun ship. I really liked this thing, and I know not everyone was into it, but I was into it. Granted, yeah, you'll get very similar performance on something like the Lexington, but it's just, it's nice to have that 32nd century space Barbie on something that I actually like to fly. Additionally, this actually had a pretty decent what's it called, console on it too. This one was able to do some pretty nice stuff with firing cycle haste, as well as adding some extra radiation damage onto this thing. It didn't really shake up the meta too drastically all that much, and you can get better, some better stuff elsewhere. But the console's not bad, and the trait, if I remember correctly, is actually pretty decent for a support build too. So if you really enjoy those support builds where you're supporting high-end DPSers and record runs, this is definitely a useful starship trait to have for that sort of build. Credence. This was, despite being a lockbox ship, I felt this one was a pretty solid release. The Vovin, man, Star Trek Online did a really great job of kind of digging into its own past and giving us some pretty banger ships. Because first we got the Dyson ships, and then we got the Vovin Obelisk carrier, which was a T6 version of the original Obelisk carrier. Old school ship, never really had impressive stats, and this thing wasn't that different, honestly. It actually had very similar stats compared to the Ahwahnee from the anniversary bundle earlier this year. But it had some interesting stuff on it, and additionally, it also changed up the console set from the original Obelisk carrier, because its console was incorporated into that console set, and with that console set, you were able to effectively give yourself another hangar bay filled with those ancient Solanae drone things. So another win for carrier builds with this one. So this one really allowed you to do some interesting stuff, and plus, honestly, it looks cool. I always thought this was a neat looking ship, and you'd be able to see that once this finally loads. Okay, memory alpha is being a little stubborn. I probably have too many tabs open, but yeah, it's decent looking ship, decent stats on it, not amazing stats on it, but if you like pet builds, this was a fun thing. Also, additionally to that, the console on it, even on its own, is also very powerful, because this thing really shook up the meta, because this thing is capable of lowering the cooldown of other consoles. So activating this while other consoles are on cooldown will lower the cooldowns of those other consoles. So this, paired with unconventional systems, you are really able to get those console cooldowns very low, being able to use them that much more quickly, which is very powerful. So this thing has been absolutely fantastic. I use this thing on pretty much every build. There's like one build I can think of where I don't use this on. But yeah, this thing, absolutely fantastic. That console has been kind of a game changer for a lot of things too. Moving on to later in July with what was probably Star Trek Online's biggest release that we've seen in years. The Heritage Starship bundle. Like, man, people went absolutely nuts for this thing, and rightfully so. These ships, huge nostalgia with all three of these. Like, the Achilles here first appeared in Star Trek Deep Space Nine Dominion Wars, I think it was called, or either Star Trek Deep Space Nine Dominion Wars or just Star Trek Dominion Wars. I forget the full name of it, because the game was released in like 1999. But yeah, it's so cool to see this thing in Star Trek Online in like modern graphical settings. It's so cool looking, and it has decent stats too. Like double miracle worker is a bit of a downside, but this thing still runs as a solid energy weapon build. Like you get all the stuff you really need on this thing out of this seating, so it's really nice to have. Plus, this thing also really changed up the meta too with its experimental weapon. It comes with the experimental, what are they called? The prototype phaser hexacannons, which, as of recording this, are now the highest DPSing experimental weapon in the game currently. These things are absolutely fantastic, and not just for phaser builds, because while they do deal phaser damage, they're actually doing really well on non-phaser damage builds too, as well, which is actually kind of surprising in my opinion. So yeah, if you like escorts with experimental weapon slots, you definitely want to have this ship just for the sake of having these hexacannons, because they're fantastic. The console is also really good too, and the trait is pretty decent for like a budget torpedo build, but the console pretty solid as well. It's definitely going to be better for a torpedo build because it fires just a bunch of micro quantum torpedoes, so it's definitely better for that sort of build. But even on a normal energy weapon build, this thing still puts out a decent amount of power. The only downside with the console is the travel delay. The actual torpedoes themselves are kind of slow, and they kind of have to go through this big looping arc for the animation. So you want to fire this off sooner rather than later, just to guarantee that your torpedoes are going to get to their target before your target is destroyed. Also from the Heritage Starship bundle, originally appearing from Star Trek Armada, the Premonition Temporal Science Spearhead. I still think that this should have been a temporal battlecruiser, not a temporal spearhead, but whatever. Honestly, the fact that this thing ended up being a science spearhead, though, it really kind of got me back into playing EPG builds a little bit more, because I had kind of neglected. I've been neglecting EPG builds or just science builds in general for a while, and this kind of I was really determined to like this ship because I love the Premonition. I really like this ship. I have a lot of nostalgia for Star Trek Armada, so I really wanted to like the ship, and thankfully this thing is a solid science build too. Like it's probably not quite as good as like the Chekov or even the Rallis. But it's got what you need on it. It's got all the essentials. Double temporal's not bad as a setup. Temporal always pairs well with EPG, so it's a pretty good setup. Additionally, while the starship trait on this thing was a freaking joke, the console on this thing, Gemini device, was actually pretty decent, because while the passive is not really that useful, because all it does is buff exotic damage, which is not something you're going to want with this active ability, because this thing will buff your firing cycle haste, which is really nice for an energy weapon build, but not great for a science build. But the exotic damage is good for a science build, but then that firing cycle haste really isn't going to be that much useful on a science build. So it's a little weird mismatch, but the click ability itself for an energy weapon build is really solid. So you get that firing cycle haste, plus it actually has a lower cooldown than most consoles, only having a 1:30 cooldown instead of a full 2 minutes. And this thing is also capable of summoning in 2 copies of the Enterprise F. And unlike most summon pets, this one actually does a decent amount of damage. Whereas most, they just kind of fly around lazily, barely shooting anything else. This one actually flies pretty fast and puts out a decent amount of damage. So the pets on these things are really nice overall just on their own. And what was probably the big crowd favorite out of the Heritage Starship bundle is the Typhon. While I still say this is just an ugly brick with warp nacelles on it, this thing was quite the ship, mainly because of its stats and what it came with. This was a new type of ship. This is an escort carrier, meaning this is an escort with a commander level tactical seat, but it has 2 hangar bays. So it's set up kind of like a dreadnought carrier, but still small and nimble like an escort. So it's basically what it's set up like is it's sort of like a strike wing escort, which is basically a normal escort with a hangar bay, but it trades the experimental weapon that a strike wing escort would have for a second hangar bay. So it's a bit of a different setup, and I'm hoping with how popular this ship was, we're going to see more of these escort carrier type ships, because this was a very popular release, and I'm really hoping Star Trek Online wants to capitalize on this by making more of these. I really hope this isn't just going to be like a one-off just for the sake of trying to fit the theme of this one specific ship, because admittedly the Typhon lore-wise is really weird. I know a lot of people were expecting this thing to be freaking huge, like this big, bulky carrier. No, the Typhon is actually a rather small ship. This first appeared in Star Trek Invasion, and it's like half the size of the Enterprise E. It's not a big ship. Stats-wise, it's not bad having double command seating. That second command seat is on a engineering lieutenant commander seat, so having a commander and lieutenant commander command seat, it's a lot of command. It's a lot of command to deal with, but you're going to get a good amount of the high-level command abilities. And the thing with command is that the high-level ones are really the only ones that are any good, so it's good that you're going to get more use out of your command abilities with having that much command seating there. Additionally, it's also got a decent amount of universal seating too, so you got some really nice versatility in there without it being too heavy in one direction or the other. But the real nice thing on this thing, well, first off, the console Fortress mode, that thing was a sad gimmick that I really wish had been improved on, but nope, it's meh. But the real win with this thing is the starship trait, repurposed cargo bay hangar. What it does is basically give you an additional hangar. Anytime you launch a hangar pet, it'll launch another one that is just an advanced level Federation Valkyrie, maxing out at 6 fighter squadrons, which is exactly how many you would get from a normal hangar pet. So you effectively get an additional hangar bay with this starship trait equipped, and this will apply to any ship with a hangar bay that you can fly. So this is, again, if you really like pet builds, this is a must-have starship trait. Now, this one came out of nowhere. The Hirogen Predator Heavy Escort, which released in August of this year into the Infinity Lock boxes, and this is a Tier 6 version of the old Hirogen Hunter, which has existed in the game for a long time as a Tier 5 ship. In fact, it's the Hirogen Hunter, the Tier 5 version, is long been considered a really good budget ship for setting up a new account because it's so like dirt cheap, but it's still got decent stats on it, and it's like the only T5 lockbot ship that you can update to Tier 5U for free. So it's really good for like setting up a new account with, because literally you could just pick one up off the exchange for dirt cheap, and sometimes you can find high level players that'll just give them out for free. These things, the T5 version of this thing is very easy to get, but the T6 version kind of came out of nowhere. There was really no one asking for this ship. It's because the Hirogen ships, the Hirogen as characters, they're kind of cool, but their ships are butt ugly. So I don't really know who was asking for this, but they got it. Stats wise, the ship was it was kind of okay. It was too heavy in the engineering seating, but being a pilot ship, again, pilot I thought was kind of an odd choice, but pilot with a secondary intel seat, not bad. So not a terrible ship, but it was a lockbox ship, so I doubt a lot of people were clamoring to get this thing. Also, the starship trait turned out to be kind of a disappointment, mainly because it's only active for like a few seconds, and then it just keeps rotating in and out of that, so it's didn't do nearly as well as some of us were hoping. Though I'm kind of grateful for that, because that just means I don't have to go out and get one of these things from the lockboxes. And I don't remember the trait, or I don't remember the console being that good either. Yeah, hull capacity, just yeah, not that great. Oh, it does get bonus damage, but after 15 seconds. Oh yeah, that thing was terrible. So yeah, very like I said, this thing just kind of came out of nowhere. There was no indication that we were getting a new Hirogen ship of all things. So I don't really know what the motivation was to do this one beyond just like checking off a to-do list or something like that, because admittedly it's been ages since we've gotten anything new from the Hirogen. It's just it seems so out of left field. I don't know what the point of this was. Next was the Nova 1 Pilot Raider, which came out in September, also released directly into the Infinity Lockboxes. This was a ship that was introduced in Star Trek Lower Decks. This was I won't I know it was from like season 4, but I'll try to avoid spoilers for it. But I mean, like I said, it's from season 4, so if I let anything slip, it's been a year. The Nova 1 version from Lower Decks. This one, again, I say this as someone who's a huge Lower Decks fan. I feel like no one really cared about this ship, honestly. Like, it's a neat ship. It's definitely weird looking, but it's kind of the point. You know, it was meant to be a weird looking ship because you weren't you know, it was meant to look like something that you've never seen before, because it was supposed to be presented as like, oh, is this some mysterious alien threat? You weren't supposed to know what this ship was going to be until like the big reveal at the end of the season. So, which was kind of cool, but at the same time, just like looks wise though, it's really weird looking. Additionally, like the stats on it are a little odd too. Like they're not bad. Like I definitely think they're a bit better than the Hirogen ship. Well, sort of. I guess it depends on how much you like Miracle Worker. I've been kind of, you know, leaning away from Miracle Worker just because it really needs a buff. It really needs a revamp, and that's another discussion for another time. But putting that on the engineering seat makes this thing a bit better, but overall, it's a full pilot ship. So if you like pilot ships, you might like this. Yeah, otherwise, you're probably not going to care. I do think it was kind of weird, though, that they released this thing less than a month after releasing that Hirogen ship that I just talked about. And releasing two pilot ships into the Infinity lockbox back to back seemed like an odd choice to me, but whatever. Honestly, I don't think anyone was really that hyped for either ship, so I don't think it really mattered all that much. Of course, if anyone was hyped about either of those two ships, that would have quickly been forgotten about after the release of this ship, the Typhoon temporal battlecruiser. This is a ship that was originally introduced into Star Trek Online from launch, but it was never released as a playable ship until until here on September 17th. And this, I don't really know what the story was there. I don't know why it was just never released as a playable ship. At least like in the early days. Eventually it got to the point where it's just like, you know, it looked so bad and aged, and you know, they didn't want to release it as a playable ship until they had a chance to make it into something that better fit the modern state of the game, whenever that was. It just happened to be that they didn't get around to it until 2024. Which is fine by me, because I mean the end state here, it looks gorgeous. I love the look of this ship. I know not everyone was into it, but I really like it. This was a cool ship, and I say that as someone who really did not care for the original Typhoon. That was one of my big arguments against it. It was like I never understood why people got so obsessed about it, because it wasn't that good looking of a ship, and it just got worse and worse looking over time because, you know, because the game kept getting so much better looking, but the Typhoon, the original Typhoon, you know, it still looked like the original launch era Typhoon. So I don't know why. I never understood why people were so, you know, latched onto the idea of getting a playable version of it. But now that we actually got one, I'm unbelievably happy about it, because it looks, they made this thing look so good. I'm really happy about it. The fact that they released it as a event ship too was a really nice move on their part too. It really brought a lot of people in to return to the game to, you know, get this ship, because it's the freaking Typhoon, man. And it's very rare where we get like Federation ships, especially Federation ships contemporary to Star Trek Online's timeline, given out for free like this. So this was a really nice way to introduce this ship. It didn't have the best stats in the world. Like I still wish this command seat had been moved anywhere else onto the bridge officer seating, but it's still a solid layout, especially being a full temporal ship. This was a really nice ship as a free ship, and even compared to a lot of other like more premium ships, like this is a better version of the Kirk battlecruiser that was released into the lockboxes a few years ago. So yeah, this was a really nice ship as a free event ship, and I feel like people who managed to get this thing were really happy with it. This thing was really nice. The console and traits, not so much. Those were kind of disappointing, but especially the starship trait. I was really hoping to get more out of that, but that thing just does not do enough damage to be worth using, even on a torpedo build. But overall, this was a nice ship, and I was really glad to see it released the way it was. Now back to the promo ships. We got the Lamarr Temporal Science Dreadnought on October 17th of this year, and this was a ship that was released. There was a lot of hype around this thing too, because this is the Voyager A from Star Trek Prodigy. So there were a lot of people who were pretty hyped about this, because, you know, Prodigy was fairly popular among a lot of the fan base, and plus it's a really cool looking ship. It's basically a different look on the Sovereign, which I thought was a weird creative decision to make a Voyager successor just look like the Enterprise E. But you know, whatever. Yeah, that did actually work out, for the kit bashing side of this ship too, because it looks so much like the Enterprise E. They literally just put it onto the Sovereign class skeleton, so you can kit bash this with any other version of the Sovereign, assuming you have those versions of the Sovereign or the ship. But but that ended up meaning that we got a Science Dreadnought version of the Sovereign class, which I think was a very weird decision in the end, especially considering that we still don't have a 5.3 battlecruiser version of the Sovereign like it should be. We got a Dreadnought version of the Sovereign before we got a battlecruiser version of the Sovereign. That's still crazy to me. Yeah, overall, this was an okay-ish ship. Mainly, it's that Miracle Worker seat that really brings this thing down, and that engineering seating. Wasn't great seating for a science ship. It's nice that it's a temporal ship because temporal goes really well with science builds, and it's a science dreadnought, so it has a hangar bay. But that Miracle Worker and engineering seat, really, really not good. I wish they had moved the specialization seats, the secondary specialization seat, to the engineering seat, and then changed it to either Intel or Command, because Miracle Worker serves this thing nothing. The Areore Miracle Worker Juggernaut. This is another ship originally from Lower Decks. This was released into the game, into the Infinity lockboxes on November 14th. And this is another one. This is one also kindly donated to me by a viewer. Again, thank you very much to that. If that angry Cation is out there somewhere, I'm sure he's lurking and waiting to claw my face off, probably. But yeah, the Areore ship, I was really hopeful about this thing. I was really hoping this would end up being the ship that would dethrone the Vodwar Miracle Worker Juggernaut, but it didn't do exactly what I had hoped it would. Mainly because of the freaking innate weapon on this thing. They, instead of giving this thing a normal Juggernaut array like the Vodwar Juggernaut has, they gave it this stupid Devastation Lance that does 3 different damage types, and because it does 3 different damage types, all 3 of those damage types are kind of nerfed a bit, so they don't do that well in comparison to one another. So you can buff any one of those, they just don't do nearly as well as even a normal lance weapon would do. And that's the other thing too. Lance weapons are not nearly as powerful as Juggernaut arrays, because Juggernaut arrays fire off as an AoE, so they can hit multiple targets at once, whereas lance weapons, while they can hit multiple targets, they only target one single enemy. So you basically have to have everything really clustered close together in order to get them really effectively to hit multiple targets at once. And even then, it's still not a guarantee. It's really not easy. It's just they never perform as well as Juggernaut arrays. So it's weird that they made this weapon a Juggernaut in the first place, because they gave it a lance weapon. And keep in mind, in the episode, there were smaller versions of these Areore ships, which they actually incorporated into the starship trait. This thing is capable of summoning little Areore Hawk fighters, but it's a terrible trait because it's tied into this stupid, your hull needs to get to 50% in order for it to trigger. I hate this mechanic and it needs to go away. But they clearly wanted to give this thing pets, so why didn't they just make it a dreadnought and give it an actual hangar bay so it could have just normal fighter pets? Why did they have to make it a juggernaut? There's, again, very weird creative decisions with this one. Now, technically, this one shouldn't be on this list because it's not a new ship. The Ferengi Nagus Marauder, actually originally released in July of 2016 as part of some sort of promotional giveaway that no one really understands how people were selected for the giveaway, because I've gone to this rant before, but yeah, it made no sense. And when people started finding out that some people got this ship and some people didn't get this ship, there were a lot of angry voices among the people who didn't get this ship. So it turned into a big thing, a lot of drama around the community, and Cryptic kind of wanted to sweep it under the rug and hope everyone would forget about it eventually. But of course, we never forget such things. But before Ambassador Kale was let go from Star Trek Online, he was really pushing Decca to release this ship for free to the entire player base, because that would be something that would really get players to, look positively on, the upcoming changes with Star Trek Online. It was a really smart move, frankly, to give this ship away just completely for free to everyone, because this while it's never been a super good ship, it's still been very coveted by a lot of old school fans of the game, just because of the weird circumstances in which it was released. Furthermore, not only did this thing get released for free, it wasn't even tied to a TFO event. They literally just made it a free giveaway in the C store. But yeah, this thing also got a bit of a buff, making it a full command ship. Like this command seat here and the inspiration abilities, the ship didn't used to have those. So it gave this thing quite an improvement compared to its original release, making this thing a really nice ship for setting up a new character, because it's a free ship that you'll have unlocked on your entire account, with rather decent stats too, because this thing is also, on top of that, on top of being a full command ship with a secondary intel seat, but it's also a 5.3 battlecruiser. This is a nice ship. And nearing the end of the year, we've got the last event ship for this year, the Eleos Intel Scout ship, which is the prize for this year's winter event, which I imagine a number of you have probably just gotten recently. Not a bad ship if you like science vessels. Not a great ship either because of that America Worker seat. But full intel, bunch of universal seating, not bad. It's got a 4-2 weapons layout, which is still fairly uncommon for science vessels, especially ones that aren't spearheads. Spearheads always have a 4-3 weapons layout, but most science vessels typically have a 3-3 weapons layout. But there are still a handful of normal science vessels, or really anything that's not a spearhead. Sometimes they do get 4 weapon slots in the front. It's not common, but I do hope we start seeing more of that, because just be a nice change of pace. But yeah, okay ship, nothing super special. The starship trait was okay on this thing if you really want like a shield regen build, but the big star of this was the console off of this thing, which gives some really nice buffs they drain some of your power and in turn give you some sort of stat buff to your weapons, which giving a weapon stat console, or giving a weapon stat buff console onto a science vessel, also kind of a weird move, because you really wouldn't want to run a weapons based build on this thing, in my opinion. I mean, you could probably do a decent side build on it, but yeah, it's I don't know, in my brain, science and weapons don't really go that well together. Generally, they've gotten better over the years, but it's still like ingrained in my brain. Science builds and energy weapon builds don't mesh, and I know it's something that I don't think I'm ever going to get over. So it's something that's always just like drilled into my brain. But yeah, the console on this thing, it really has kind of shaken up the meta, because there's no cooldown on any of these abilities. Basically, you equip the console, you get these 3 abilities. One of them will buff your weapon's crit chance, crit severity, and what's the other one? Firing cycle haste. Each of the 3 abilities will do one of those in exchange for draining one of your powers. You also get a certain passive based off of which slot you put it in, so you got to think about like which slot you got to put it in, which is also a nice mechanic I like seeing too, because everything these days is universal consoles, so you can just place them in any slot you want. But if we start seeing more universal consoles that have certain effects based on what slot you put them in, it'll make building ships a little bit more interesting, just because we'll have to put some more thought into what goes where, which is something we haven't had in Star Trek Online in a very long time. It's really going to make shipbuilding more interesting if that's something they lean further into as we go on into the future. And for the last ship released this year on December 3rd, 2024, the Obena America Worker Heavy Cruiser. This was something I had been waiting for a very long time, because keep in mind, the Obena was first seen in the season 2 finale of Star Trek Lower Decks, and we didn't get it until the end of 2024. We got the Nova 1 before this thing. We got the Areore ship before this thing, which crazy, but we finally got it, and a lot of people weren't impressed about it because its stats are basically the same as the Princeton, which is still weird to me. But at the same time, I had fun in the Princeton. I had fun in this thing too. I mainly wanted this for Space Barbie. This is another one that was kindly gifted to me by that Rabidcation, who seemingly wants me to suffer by throwing ships at me. Again, thank you for the ship. But yeah, it's funny. But yeah, this was I do wish the stats had been a little bit different on this thing. A 5-3 weapons layout would have gone a long way for this thing. Even though the seating isn't that great, giving it a 5-3 weapons layout would have gone a long way for improving just the general opinion of this ship too, because one, it would have made it that much more different from the Princeton, and two, it would have been the first time that we finally got a 5.3 Excelsior. Even though this one doesn't blend with the original Excelsior, this one is still kit batchable with the Excelsior 2. So they share the name, so it still would have been a step, an improved step compared to the previous versions of the Excelsior, as well as the Princeton, because again, they were so similar. It was so weird that they would have made them so similar, especially given that they were released in the same year too. I mean, granted, on opposite ends of the year, because the Princeton was released in February of this year, and now we're into December. It's just, I wanted more for this ship. I really did, and I don't think it would have taken much to give it more. Give it enough more that to make more players happy with it. But as it was just kind of a. I feel like a lot of people just viewed this as another underwhelming lockbox ship, which kind of a sad way to end the year. But it is what it is. Yeah, that is every ship that was released into Star Trek Online over the course of 2024. And overall, it's been a pretty decent year for ships. Like, we've gotten some pretty nice additions into the game, be them playable stats wise or through consoles or traits. We got some pretty interesting stuff that has really shaken up how we build ships these days. So it's been quite a year, and I'm hoping we get more stuff that'll shake things up in the coming future. Like, the anniversary event is not far away. That should be coming out in like mid-February. So the 15th anniversary bundle, we already got a teaser for one of the ships in there. We don't know what is going to be on it, but it's probably going to be, it's the Ark Royal, which I know it's got to be some kind of carrier, but we don't know what's going to be on it or what kind of carrier it's going to be. So, but the anniversary events typically, or the anniversary bundles typically have something pretty cool on them. So I imagine there's going to be some more interesting stuff to come to the future, and I really hope we keep a good pace like we have over this year. And honestly, it's impressive that Star Trek Online has been able to keep up the pace, at least in terms of ship releases. I know we haven't gotten a lot of story content, at the latter part of this year, but in terms of ship releases, it's been a pretty decent year, and I hope to see more of that next year. So yeah, really not much else to say for this video, so I'm just gonna close it out here. If be sure to comment down below what was your. I put this in a community post earlier, but I'll ask it here too. What was your favorite ship release this year? Out of all of these, let me know down below in the comments. And while you're down there, like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, all that stuff. Check out the affiliate links. Check out the merch store down below. And while you're down there, do all the usual outro stuff. Either way, though, thank you so much for watching. My name's Stu, and I will see you guys next time.